Everybody, it's gone 7 o'clock. We ought to get started. Can I take apologies for absence, firstly?
Yes, we have apologies from Councillor Perryban.
Thank you. And now the minutes of the previous meeting. Does anybody have any amendments that I think need to be made to the previous minutes of the previous meeting? Yes.
Hi, reading through the minutes, I just wondered what has actually happened with that taxi rebate, because nothing seems to have happened with that.
No, we're just talking about whether there's any corrections that we need to make to that meeting, not answers to any points in that meeting.
Well, I'll defer that question then, because it's still outstanding.
Can I like to speak?
Yes.
I think there's a very fundamental issue here, because the committee put forward a proposal, and within the minutes and the report for this committee should be feedback as to what happened to our proposal. And that is what we need to have, because if us as a committee made a proposal and that is being totally and utterly ignored, then something unconstitutional has happened, and we'd like to have an answer to it. And it is very, very significant, Barry. You can't just say it's not part of the minutes. This is a serious issue of how a committee is run. And I think that as chairman of the committee, you need to do it. It's the only part of the agenda where we can put it.
There.
Yeah.
All I'm saying is that question, all I'm asking at this time is so can I say, are the minutes correct or not? That's all that we have to discuss at this point. But we can raise the other issue at a time when it's appropriate for the agenda, okay?
Well, show me where it is in the agenda.
Well, certainly not at this point. Okay.
Well,
can we just agree that any matters arising from the minutes I will take after this point, okay?
Okay.
Right. Another one then.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just a very minor point on the committee members present. It's got Sean Murphy.
All right. Okay, thank you. Apart from that, can I agree that those are correct version of the minutes, please? Those in favour? Thank you. Right. Now, matters arising from the minutes. With this question, I think that we need to get to which officers need to tell us what the progress is with regards to that.
Good evening, Chair. I can make that point. It's Ed Shaler here, the head of enforcement and safety. The proposal the committee made to reduce the licence fee in those three categories would have gone into the budget report for the February full council in the fees and charges section as a recommendation from the licensing committee, which the council would then either have accepted or not as the decision it's made. I would offer apologies if this committee was expecting a feedback report on that item, which I've neglected to do. But I'm certainly happy to consult the minutes of the full council meeting that set the budget and see what the outcome was of that recommendation.
Sarah?
I think there's been a bit of a misunderstanding here. This is actually about last year's fees, and it was not about future projection of fees, which I understand would have gone to full council. This is about last year's fees, and we agreed as a committee. I appreciate we're not decision making, but we made a recommendation to freeze, and because some taxi drivers had already paid the new fee before we froze the fees, then they were supposed to get a rebate. And so I don't understand why we're talking about what went to the budget meeting when that's forward looking. This is what happened in the past. And we were told at the time, at the next meeting when we followed up on this, and to find out if those taxi drivers had that rebate, we were told that a single member of the executive in private decided they weren't going to do it. and it was just thrown out and that was it. And this is the aspect that we're actually wanting some feedback on, because that's not due process for doing that. It's not constitutional.
Sorry, Sarah, I think you weren't at the committee last time. No, this was at the last meeting. I made a proposal, seconded by Rachel, that we would freeze the figure that was before, the 2 to 248, for the coming year as well. We discussed the point that you raised, and we went round a loop and were told that that had effectively gone nowhere, and we weren't very happy about it. So I made a proposal that we would keep those three. Sorry, I talk without the baskets. The three parts of the license fee that was referred to there were that we would go through into the current year coming, that we would have it at 248 instead of 292 or whatever the two figures were. And that's what we put forward, and that's what the minutes in here said we would do. Our problem is I haven't seen any mention of this particular issue in any of the finance papers. I could find nothing. And I don't believe the fees figures were included in any of the full documentation. We've never seen any fees. I can't remember seeing it. So I have not seen any documentation associated with the budget where that proposal, where we would reduce the fees, which would have had a financial impact of not that much, but few thousand, was to be dealt with. But I have seen no mention in any of the financial documentation, and I'm very concerned that it could very well be that the proposal from this committee has been just forgotten about or lost or not dealt with. And I would, which is what happened to the previous one. And I not think that's acceptable. It's undermining the value of this committee. If we as a committee make a proposal, we expect that proposal to be looked at, seen at, and get a response back as to what has happened to it. Now, this is the second time, by the sound of it. The point that Sarah just mentioned is the one we discussed at the last meeting, and we agreed it didn't go anywhere. But the proposal was, as I just said, and we haven't heard anything. And as we've now got the next committee meeting, I would have expected there to be some mention as to what has happened to what we proposed at the last committee meeting, to know whether it has been agreed or not, or whether it's not. So it could have been a small table of the fees to say this is the agreed fees. And so can I ask that we get forwarded what the fees are for those three areas for 22, 23, which have been agreed at the within the budget, and were the proposals we put from this committee actually presented to the budget process? And that's a serious issue, because it's a breach of constitution. Nothing's happened.
Can I just clarify then? Because obviously there's two issues here, because obviously the one I've raised and what Lindsay's raised. I guess I wasn't in the last meeting. I have read the minutes, and the minutes didn't tell me information that's made me feel satisfied that the previous issue, the one that I've raised, has been dealt with. I still don't know what's happened to that. So if there was something that was said in the meeting that's not in the minutes, I apologise. But reading that, I do not understand how that's been dealt with, if at all, other than what we were told originally, that a single member of the executive just dismissed it because there was no appetite, I think we were told, for it, rather than going through a proper due process. So what's going on?
Can I ask the officers to respond to that, please?
Yes, with regards to the point about the current year's fees and the request for a rebate, that was discussed at the January meeting, and it was pointed out that there had been a briefing from the head of legal to members in November, answering the point about whether the licensing committee could recommend or impose a rebate, which wasn't actually funded. But that was an issue that was dealt with at the time. I wasn't personally involved in that. But my understanding was that the discussion at the January meeting effectively closed that down, and there wasn't going to
Sorry,
be
it hasn't been
back.
dealt with. It hasn't been dealt with.
Yeah, I make no further comment on that. That is beyond my knowledge, having only been here since November. With regards to this year's fees, my understanding was that it was to be in the budget setting report in the fees and charges section at the council meeting. I was in liaison with finance officers after the last licensing committee about that item. I would need to go away and consult the papers to see where that was listed, but it would have been listed as a recommendation. And my understanding is that it would be for the full council to decide whether to accept that recommendation or not in the fees and charges section.
Okay, so can we have a report on that available for the next meeting then, please?
I might suggest to members that you might wish to have it before the next meeting, which
Yes, before
might
would
not be
be,
till
yeah,
June. So
whenever it's available.
perhaps after this meeting, within a reasonable period of time, say 10 days to 2 weeks, for me to get the information and provide information for members.
Thank you. Peter, yes.
Yeah, I was just, so that's covering the forward-looking one. What about the one we discussed before, Sarah's point?
Yeah. Paul.
Yeah, that was the very point I was going to raise. It's, Sarah wasn't here at the last meeting, so I raised the 9,000 rebate, which I didn't get an answer on. And as per the minutes, it's you then cut that because we didn't get an answer. And it then states, in relation to the concerns raised, the chairman stated that members should have blah, 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 blah. So we still have not had an answer on the £9,000. So can we have an answer on that, please?
Okay. What's is that something that you've got as part of the process of being going through at the moment? Talking from the officer's point of view.
Well, from the officer's point of view, we actually regard it as having been answered in November by the briefing from the head of legal. So from the officer's position, that was the officer's answer.
Right. Peter?
Yes, that actually told us somewhat of the process, but didn't actually tell us what actually happened. As Sarah has indicated, we made a decision in this committee for something to happen, and it was then stifled behind some back door somewhere. And that's what we're trying to find out. Where was the due process done?
Okay, well, as far as I'm aware, I think for what they were actually saying is that the final decision does not lie with this committee as far as the actual budget is concerned, that the officers can change it accordingly.
Which is fair enough, but we have no visibility into the underlying decision making that has overruled this committee's decision. And that is the point that we're trying to make. Where is the accountability for that decision? Where is it recorded? All we've got is this committee made a decision and then it's been ignored. But who, by what, when, and how?
Right. Michelle?
If an executive actually overruled it, what executive overruled it? When did they do it? Was it an IMD? What was it? How did it occur?
Yeah.
That's all we want to know, because it seems to have just suddenly disappeared without actually any kind of process in the process.
Okay, well, if we make sure that we do get feedback from that as soon as it's possibly available, that's something that, how soon do you think we might be able to receive an answer to that? From the officer's point of view.
I've just had a message from the head of legal on the meeting that he will circulate a reply, reflecting the discussion at the last meeting, but also reflecting the information that has been previously relayed. So Sean O'Connor has just messaged me to that effect. So it will be circulated after the meeting in, say, 10 days to 2 weeks.
Okay? Yeah, I think we can't, there's no more point in discussing that any further until you've got that documentation. Fair enough, okay?
So just to clarify, I'll be satisfied once I know what process and decision making and who made those decisions will be announced. If it's just another reiteration of the legal wording, then that's not going to satisfy me.
Well, that's up to you to make that the statement at the time rather than speculation at this stage. Thank you. Any declarations of interest this evening? Sorry, yeah, sorry.
Sorry, I just had another comment on the minutes.
All right.
Could we have an update from officers on the Hackney carriage vehicle policy? Because that was supposed to be at the last meeting and also this meeting. So could we have an update on where that is, please?
On the Hackney carriage?
The vehicle policy.
Yeah. Do we have any feedback on that?
I'd like to ask one of my colleagues who's been working on the policy to comment on that. That was also touched on at the January meeting with regard to the timescale, but Julie O'Brien is online.
Hello, thank you, Chair, if I may. Yeah, just to let everybody know that unfortunately the solicitor who's been dealing with the taxi policy for us has only just sent through the draft policy. So I sent that through to Ed just this morning, so he won't have had a chance to have a look at it. And unfortunately, it missed the deadline to get the report to you. But you will definitely have the report at the next committee meeting in June.
Okay. Thank you. Paul?
Yes, going back to the minutes again. The letter that was sent to Reading Borough Council about the usage of the Reading bus lanes, have we had any feedback from Reading Borough?
I don't think so. This
It's
should,
page 5 at the very bottom.
yeah, this really should have been brought up by you as under members' questions, because you will, rather than bringing it at this stage. But I'll accept that. Can we get? Is there any further feedback with regards to the Reading bus routes?
I haven't seen a reply from Reading on that. I'll ask any of my colleagues if they have, but if not, it's about 3 weeks since we wrote to them, so I'll need to follow it up.
Yeah, no, I think that the leader of the council has been trying to have negotiations with Reading with regards to issues like that, and I don't think he's had a satisfactory response yet. We'll let you know when we've had a response from them. Okay. That brings us on to public question time, and we do have a question. Imogen, are you online?
I am indeed. I am indeed. Although I think I technically come under a member's question time looking at this.
Oh,
agenda.
sorry. Yes.
But
Yes, members' question. Sorry, we had no public sections. Yeah, sorry.
are you all right for me then to start? I can read it.
Yes, go ahead.
Wokingham Town has been experiencing a considerable amount of antisocial behaviour revolving around people leaving the bars that have a late licence. This can be as simple as a noisy behaviour and broken glass around the town, from people heading home to fighting and a recent stabbing incident. Wokingham Borough Council has the power to recover a late licence levy on premises that have a late licence, essentially to cover the costs of extra policing and support for problems that arise from late licences. Is this something that we can ask the licensing team to consider?
Thank you. Right. Well, I have a response for you. And the licensing authorities have since 2012 had the power to introduce a late night levy on premises licensed to sell alcohol after midnight. The levy must cover the whole of an authority's area, although the government is considering amending the rules so that just a part of the borough can be subject to a levy, e.g. a town centre, but it has not yet done so. The council cannot set its own levy. The amount of the levy is prescribed nationally based on the rateable value and varies from £299 for the smallest premises to £4,440 for the larger premises, in which the primary business is the sale of alcohol. There would be costs to the council to conduct consultation and administer the scheme. The revenue raised after deduction of costs goes towards the cost of policing the late night economy and must be split between the council and the police. At least 70% of the revenue must be given to the police, and the council can retain up to 30% to fund the services it provides to manage the nighttime economy. Examples of using the levy around the country are additional police officers, projects like a club host project aiming to reduce sexual harassment within clubs, first aid training for staff of licensed premises, defibrillators for town centres, taxi marshals and street cleansing. The government estimates that about 94 licensed authorities had enough late opening premises to generate sufficient revenue from the levy to make it worthwhile to implement it. But in the 9 years since it came in, very few councils have put a levy in place. The number is about 10 or 12, and mostly large towns like Newcastle, Nottingham and Liverpool, and urban boroughs like Hackney, Camden and Islington. Cheltenham introduced a levy in 2014 but scrapped it in 2017 as the council had not received the income it had expected from the levy. Late night levies are strongly opposed by the licensing trade, who believe them to heap financial pressure onto venues that are already contributing financially to the success of their area, and to be a blunt tool that penalises well-run businesses as well as those which might be causing problems. This is because there are only a few exempt premises allowed. The levy would apply to all on and off sale premises with a late licence in the borough, even if they did not actually open at those times. In conclusion, the main concern is that levies in a borough like ours would not be financially viable, as the revenue raised would be small in comparison to the cost of implementing the scheme. Coupled with likely opposition from the licensing trade, which has suffered financially 2 years, I would prefer to tackle problems which arise in another way. For example, from April, the council will have a team of antisocial behaviour officers working until 2 a.m. on Fridays and Saturday evenings, who will be able to observe if there are any problems arising from late night licensing premises and make recommendations for improvements in the management of those premises. If a venue is not well run, we can review its licence. However, our statement of licensing policy, which is due for renewal in 2023, states that late night levies could be considered if the need arises. So I see no reason why a late night levy could not at least be considered in the review of the licensing policy, in the light of whether there is enough evidence of need and whether the levy scheme would be financially viable. I hope that gives you some feedback. Do you have a supplementary question?
I do indeed. Considering that in Wokingham Town, the bulk of the antisocial behaviour that we get from the late licences happens between 2 and 4 a.m. Understanding that Wokingham Town Council has CCTV around the town hall and everything, we get to see, we know when the trouble happens, and particularly the recent stabbing happened after 3 o'clock when the individuals left the gig house, left the pub. And I know it's and so and a lot of the trouble we get, and when I talk to residents around there, it is 3:30 early hours of the morning. But what you're talking about, the antisocial behaviour team there, they're finishing work at 2 o'clock, which is too early to tackle this problem. So my sort of question is what are we going to do to tackle these problems where people are having to walk their dogs through broken glass in the morning? We get broken windows around the town, things like our Christmas trees and hanging baskets and stuff around the town are getting vandalized in low level ways, but we also get broken windows, and occasionally we get severe things like the stabbing that we had a few weeks ago. We've also had another stabbing near the station last year as well. What this is, I want to know what Woking Borough Council is going to do to tackle this problem, particularly as the problem happens when the pubs close after the pubs close, and it seems that the antisocial behaviour service has shut up shop by then.
Yes, well, I think, as I mentioned, that we are reviewing the licensing policy, and the item on the agenda which relates to the return of the licensing functions for public protection partnership is going to actually look at that, and I think that there might be some information in there which you'll find helpful with regards to that, as to the way that's going to be organised, because there are plans to actually put people in place that were going to be around until 2 o'clock in the morning, but they may well even be able to extend that.
But as I said, 2 o'clock is too early. The pub shut. The late licence ends at 3 o'clock.
Well, yes, but if we feed that back to them, this has not been cast in stone yet. We can probably make some proposals for that, and with regards to that, so I suggest you perhaps wait until you receive that and make some comments with regard to that. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Sorry. Who's calling? Oh, sorry. Bill, you wanted to say something.
Yeah, I think just on the point that Imogen's making, yes, they are. The ASB team will finish at 2 o'clock. It could be revised should there be a considerable need to increase the time, but of course the cost involved would be considerable as well to actually have almost a 24-hour service. That would increase the cost considerably, but it's something that we could review at a later date. We can either review the numbers of staff we have, also the hours at which they're working based on our experience as time goes on. And I think the point made by Imogen about stabbings, I can't see our ASB team being involved in that. That's a serious crime and that is a police issue. So I think that's something that it would be left to the police to deal with anyway. But certainly as far as our ASB teams are concerned, we are trialling the 2 o'clock Friday and Saturday nights. If there was a need to be changed, that would be reviewed at a later date, but it's early days yet. We haven't started and we don't know quite where the need is. So until then, we'll stick with our times as it is at the moment.
Okay, thanks, Bill. We have no further questions, so if we can move on to item 30, that's the Hackney carriage tariffs. Who is going to introduce that to us?
Yes, I'll be happy to introduce that. Yes, so this is the follow-up to the discussion at the January meeting where members approved to go out to consultation on the taxi trade's proposed increases to its tariffs. And we've had some responses to the consultation, which are detailed in the report. And the committee is asked to, having considered the representations that have been made, some in support of the fare increase and some not in support of it and some more neutral, but making some additional points, to determine either to accept the new table of fares at Appendix C, which has been proposed by the taxi trade, which we've calculated to result in an approximately 34% increase. It's not a precise percentage increase because one of the amendments the taxi trade wish to have is bringing forward by half an hour the time at which the nighttime tariff starts from 11 p.m. to 10:30 p.m. So of course that's a timing change rather than a fee change. So we have to sort of estimate the increase that would impose overall, or determine that there should be no modifications to the current table of fares. The current table of fares is also in an appendix. I think it's Appendix B. Or to determine that there should be a different modification to the table of fares, which the committee is able to do because there have been representations, provided its choice of percentage increase has a rationale and a reason behind it. There's a minor, well, it appears a minor point, but it's actually, of course, a major point for the taxi trade, and that's the date that any change might come into effect. It was to have been the 1st of April, but we've been pointed out that there is a nearby borough council which is also changing its fares, which means that meter changes have to be configured. So it might be advisable to push the start date after that April 1st weekend to the 4th of April. That would, of course, delay the increase by a weekend, which would be unpopular with the taxi trade, but may be inevitable to avoid a difficulty with getting the meters recalibrated. So officers are available on the call to take any questions. Otherwise, I leave it for the committee to make its decision.
Chair, just a point of clarification. The 1st of April needs to be delayed by 4th April. I mean, I didn't understand the rationale for that. Just because another council is doing it at the same time, why is it preventing us doing it?
Chairman, good evening. It's Moira Fraser speaking. It doesn't prevent, Councillor Eunice, doesn't prevent you from doing it. We've just had a request from one of the meter companies, not all of the meter companies, who've suggested that they may not be able to provide the service on that day, but you could still go for the 1st of April. That would be up to members to make that determination.
Yeah, okay, from that point of view, I think we need to, we need to talk about the various issues that relate to this, and I'll start taking any issues that people think that they wish to raise right at this moment. Yeah, sorry, Rachel.
Thank you. I mean, I would propose that we accept the modifications raised by the trade, but with the accepting also the recommendation of officers that the flag time is changed to 110 seconds for the reasons in the paper. I think, you know, in terms of the raise, the level of objections has been fairly low. This is a maximum fare, as we've said before. Drivers can charge less. And I'm of course aware that the rise will concern some people, but I'm also concerned that if we don't allow a rise, then some drivers may go out of business entirely and they won't have to be providing a service at all. So I would propose that we accept the modifications as requested by the trade, but with the officer's recommendation that the flag time is 110 seconds.
Can I just respond to that? You're saying that people are likely to go out of business. If you look at Appendix D, where it gives a comparison with all of the other authorities, we're at the top of the list. The only one that's higher than ours is London Heathrow, and that we would expect those to be high. But what you're suggesting is that that all of these authorities here are going to be having financial problems with regards to that. Is that what you really think is happening?
If I could come back on that, drivers have already gone out of business, you know, drivers during the pandemic, so that's already happening. And, you know, Woking is a very expensive place to live. You know, that's just a fact, isn't it?
More expensive than Oxford or Reading or whatever. Yeah. Chris.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's very difficult for us to calculate what a reasonable fare tariff would be. I think it's also very difficult for the taxi drivers to do the same. And like any business, they're trying to set their prices appropriately to maximise profit. And they may well get it wrong, but I think Rachel's right, and we should accept their proposal because, as it says several times in the report, they can lower the fare tariff if they wish, if they find that they've lost a lot of trade and overall their profitability has declined, which is a very good point. And I think they are the best people ultimately to work out what the best fare structure for them is. I would like to ask, if we do determine option, whichever option it is, to agree with it, the proposed tariff change, that if they wish to reduce it, if they find that they've set them too high, would we as council be able to assist them in publicising it? And it does say in the report that operators can publicise the fact that they've reduced their tariffs. Would we be able to help them? And indeed, if we were to lower the tariff formally, would that require another consultation? I can't see members of the public objecting to a lowering of the tariff. How would that work? Just to make it easy for them, if they wish to lower the tariff if they found they got it too high. Thank you.
I don't think that from that point of view that they would be talking about going across the board, but I think all taxi drivers have the right to be able to offer a lower price to customers. And that would probably be the circumstances under which that would be taken. They wouldn't want to apply that across the whole of their fleet from that point of view.
Well, it's just possible that they might want to do that. They set it too high and want to reduce by 10% or whatever. To formalise that and to let the public know, and thus encourage more people to use taxis.
Well, yeah, I think I mean, it's possible. That can I take Sarah first, and then Shahid?
It was just actually a clarification. The table on Appendix D isn't actually the complete table. If you click on the link that goes through, you'll see that there are actually other authorities in between Heathrow and the projection of where Wokingham will be. So it's not actually second on the list if it goes ahead. I just wanted to clarify that.
Okay. Right. Shahid.
Chair, it's a difficult one, but at the same time, I feel that there's a number of things reasons why actually I support this proposal. One, I think the last time there was increase, if I'm not wrong, was 2010. Yeah. There's some modification in 2014, but I think it was 2010. Right.
Chairman,
So
that's correct, Councillor Yunus. There was in 2014 there was a slight modification in terms of when there were extra passengers in the car, but the existing fee structure in the main has been in existence since 2000.
So if we look, okay, thank you for the clarification. For 11 years, there hasn't been increase at all, and how much inflation we had in that time. So it's something to bear in mind. We had a pandemic for the last 2 years. That business has been impacted severely as a result of that. So a number of people have gone out of business. I know myself personally, a number of people have actually gone out of business because of that. Now we're going through inflation of obviously rise in the gas, electricity, and all the other things, as we know about how much increase that is happening. I mean, if we don't think of this way, if we don't do this increase, certainly I can see a number of other businesses, they will go out of business because the inflation increase, the other increases in the energy, etc., probably will be unbearable. So the downside of that is that we won't have a reliable service taxi, which people rely on, because it is financially not going to be affordable. So, I mean, there's a number of reasons why I think this proposal should go ahead, and I would fully support that.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I would fully support this recommendation going forward. I think the taxi trade's response to the points raised by the objectors, I think are sound. As already pointed out, it's been over 11 years since the last time it was actually revised, and inflation has risen quite dramatically since then. Just going back to that table, if you click on the link on page 20, most of those authorities have not raised their charges for a long, long time, and they're playing catch up, and that's where we are at the moment. It's such a long time ago that we were raised, as say 11 years ago, and you'll find probably that most of the others will also be playing catch up in the next year or so. So I fully support the recommendation.
I don't think there's any question from anybody here that we should not allow them to increase their fees. It's just a question of what level we set it. Abdul.
Thank you, Chair. Just one clarification. The timing between 11:30 bringing forward, absolutely support on that. However, is it for only weekend or is it for flat 7 days rate?
we
Appendix
get that.
C, it's on there, page 22, it's every day.
Every
Tariff
day.
1 for hiring between 6 and 10:30 Monday to Sunday.
All right.
Yep.
All right, so it's, thank you, okay. Clear for that.
Any further questions or comments members want to make? So we are agreed that we're proposing at this stage that we accept the proposals as put forward by the taxi members and also make the amendment so that the taxi meters are not going to be affected by putting the slight increase that's proposed for that. Is everybody happy with that? Chris?
So we need to establish the date.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
We have to decide on a date for implementation, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, that's, are we still wanting to go ahead with the 1st of April? Does anybody think that we need to change it because of what's being proposed?
Chair, it would appear to me that we should go with the 4th, because if there's likely to be a problem with having enough people being able to alter the meters in the taxis, we're going to have a mix of some working on the new tariff on April the 1st and some working on the 4th. So I would have said it would have been sensible to go for the 4th. Well, that's what the I think, is it the fact that the people who will alter the meters are saying they could cope with by doing it by the 4th? They wouldn't be able to do it on the 1st because there's too many other boroughs changing, and therefore the 4th is the time to do it. Is that right?
Yeah.
Also, the other point of clarification as well, is it actually the old meters we're talking about? Are we talking about every meter and every taxi where there's an issue? Because I thought the latest one may have a digital ones and they probably can do it a lot quicker.
Yes, it affects the older vehicles from that point of view, but
And other thing is, if it's an older one, how many old ones do we have? I'm just trying to gauge how many people taxis will be affected as a result of this. Are we talking about few taxis with old meters whose meters may not be adjusted, or are we talking about every taxi in our borough? So I think trying to gauge the impact, right? If the impact is very small, we're talking about 5 taxis, then may as well go on the 1st. But if it's going to be everyone, right, then yes, it's worth delaying it for the 4th.
Chairman, if it helps, is that there are a number of companies that are able to change the meters in the borough, and each of they have a license and they change specific meters. One of the companies has let us know that they're going to have a clash with Surrey Heath. That's not the response that we've had necessarily from all the taxi companies, but it does mean that you potentially, as Councillor Stone pointed out, may have some changing on the 1st and some not being able to be changed on the 1st. Just whether members are willing to countenance that or not.
Paul, were you asking?
Chair, I was actually going to ask the same question about the number of companies that can actually do this type of work, and have they been approached, and have we had a response back from them? And secondly, how many vehicles are actually are we looking at here with the older type meters? That was my question, but that bit hasn't been answered.
Chairman, it's not specifically related to the age of the vehicles, it's related to the make of the meter. So there's one of the companies who service a specific brand of meter who've let us know that they've got a problem.
Yes, I think we're getting a bit mixed up here. It's not related to the question of the older vehicles. It's related to all of the vehicles will have to be changed.
Yeah, no, I understand that. What I'm asking is the meters that need to be changed, how many do we have a problem with?
Yeah. Bill?
if I can just come back, it just seems pointless to me to get into this state, and it would be much easier to just say, let's do it on the 4th, and we would know then that they're all working to the same tariff at the same time. I don't see that 3 days is really going to cause too much of a problem.
No, I agree. Do any members feel that it must go out on the 1st? No. Well, in that case, why don't we adopt the 4th, and then we're certain that everybody's going to be treated equally, because it's the public that might be affected by the fact that if vehicles aren't available because they're being changed and so forth. I'm happy with that. So we're
Chair, can I just another point of clarification? How do we make sure, or do the officers make sure that every taxi have actually changed their meters? Is there any checks which is done, or do we just rely on the taxi drivers to, do it, and we trust that they will be done?
Do we have any feedback from the officers with regards to that? Do you actually ascertain that they all change?
Chairman, as I understand it, they would get authorization from the meter company that's recalibrated the meters, and then they need to submit that information to the licensing committee, and we'll be writing them to them tomorrow to ask that that's done by the 18th of April.
Okay. Abdul?
Just wondering, is that enough time for them to do the changing, 18th of April?
Yeah. That's different, yeah. Okay. So
Just to
think
say, there's a legal requirement that they do it by the 17th, because it's got to be done within 2 months of the consultation closing, Chairman.
Yeah. Right. Okay. Yes. Yeah. Okay. Right. I think I think that we've discussed this round in various ways, as far as I'm concerned. I think we've all under the impression that we want to move ahead on determining that under item A, which is that the modification to be made by the table of fares and appendix requested by the taxi trade be approved, and also with the amendment as shown on page 15 under the paragraph there with regards to the changes to the flag rate from 863 yards and 120 seconds to 440 yards and 150 seconds. You're aware, agree with that. Can I ask all those in favour of that proposal, please raise their hands.
Sorry, Chair, can I just check that? Because I think you said 150 seconds. We're talking about the 110 seconds. Is that, am I the only one that's?
Yeah, it's point 13 on page 15. So it's point 13 I think you need to refer to.
Sorry. Yeah, 4 against, and yeah, well, that then is approved by this. Yeah. Can we vote then on the proposal as finally suggested? Those in favour?
And that's 110 seconds, yes?
Right. Okay. So we're now on to item 31. That's the return of licensing functions. Who's going to introduce this from the officer side, please?
Sorry, Chair, do we need to vote on the 4th of April as well, or is that understood to be 4 as well?
That we agreed that.
Okay, that's fine.
Yep.
Yes, Chair, I'm happy to introduce agenda item 31, which was an item on the forward plan, probably from some time back, to consider the implications of the return of licensing functions from the Public Protection Partnership to Wokingham Borough Council on the 1st of April. As you can see, it's a fairly brief report. I'm sure the information in background and hearing procedure on pages 27, 28 is very familiar to committee members. So I just draw your attention to the bottom of page 28, talking about Wokingham's licensing service moving forward. We have a new licensing service manager whose name is Kieran Hinchliffe, and he's joining the council tomorrow. Unfortunately, not quite in time for tonight's meeting to introduce himself. We'll have two licensing officers and two licensing processing officers to deal with applications and payments. So the process will be, we hope, seamless, and that license applicants and licensees will still be able to use the same email address, licensing@wokingham.gov.uk, which has been the case for some time. Whilst the PPP have been providing the service, they use Wokingham's email addresses. We are rebuilding Wokingham's web pages for licensing so that there will be website pages on Wokingham's site dedicated to licensing and the various other services which are coming in-house from the 1st of April. They're not visible yet because, of course, we don't want to confuse people who are still making applications or seeking information during March. But shortly before the end of March, those web pages will become live. There'll be an online payment facility for smaller payments. Larger amounts above £100, we will prefer to invoice so that we can more accurately track receipt of payments. In the due course, we would like to move to online forms so that people can submit applications for licenses, especially the more common types, online. Unfortunately, that does require a whole new software suite, which will require some capital expenditure, but that is in the forward plan. For the moment, we will make application forms available for people to download, fill in on a computer and attach to an email and send to licensing. So not quite as good as submitting an online form from the customer's point of view, but at least it avoids the need for printing and handwriting. So I'm happy to take any questions, but suffice to say that we've been working very hard for several months to make these arrangements, and we are confident that in just under a month's time we will be ready to move forward with very little disruption to service.
Thank you. Sarah.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask about the staffing. Is anyone coming over from PPP, or is it all new members to the council? Are there any internal transfers? I'm wondering about how the continuity of service is going to work and from that perspective.
We've got one of my colleagues on the call today. I won't embarrass her by saying which one, but yes, one of my colleagues on the call today is coming over, and in the licensing team, and we will have 3 new staff in that team and a new manager. So we will have a steep curve to integrate those people into the borough. Across the service as a whole, there are 9 people transferring from the partnership over to the Wokingham service.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. It's good to hear that the service coming in-house will be seamless. It will be continuous, and hopefully we'll be able to provide a better service. Chair, what I would like to see is probably maybe 6 months' time or in a year's time, a report back to the committee which provides evidence to show that actually the service, how we're doing as a service. So, and how does that compare to the service we had as part of the partnership? Because the whole thing, the reason we're doing it, because obviously we can provide a better service in-house. But one of the roles I have is as a deputy executive for insider change is that everything we do in the council, it needs to be evidence-based. So I'm putting that hat on and saying, look, we need to show, we need to demonstrate that it's a better value for money, and also we're providing a better service as a council because we provide the service in-house. So I'm thinking, obviously, you need some time to gather the data, but maybe in years' time, I would certainly like to see that information, and that will be, I think, I'm sure all the members will find it beneficial.
Yeah, I think that's something that we may even want feedback on that sooner than the dates that you say there, but it's not going to be quite so straightforward because obviously the different structures as existed to make comparisons back to what was actually being done would have to be done on an individual basis on the various areas, not necessarily as a total document. But I understand that.
Sorry, can I come back? I mean, what I'm thinking is that we need to be clear what the KPI is going to be for this measuring our service. So there must be some KPIs before. The new KPIs may be different, but I can't see it's going to be hugely different. For example, if you look at antisocial behavior, there is certain, similarities going to be there. Sorry, I mean, under the PPP side of things. But whatever the KPI is going to be, right, there might be some same or could be different, but I think wherever comparison can be made, yes, let's do that. But there might be different ones that at least we have. But I mean, the reason I say 1 year is because you need to give some time to actually gather the evidence, and then that'll be much more realistic rather than looking at after 3 months or 6 months. Maybe it's not. It may be difficult to tell.
Yeah, I'm sure that the officers will be probably going down that route anyway, but that suggestion will obviously be of help. I think it's Lindsay now wanted to be.
These questions go back to a number of conversations I had with leader of the council when I was leader of the Lib Dem group. Does the remit of this current licensing committee change? And the reason why I was asking that is that when we were talking, it sounded like we needed to have a new committee which covered both licensing and other subjects which are being discussed tonight, including antisocial behaviour, because it was all going to be linked together. So I'd like to understand, are we continuing with a licensing committee under the current structure with its current remit, or has its remit increased, or are there any other changes that may well be coming? Because that was, I have to say, some understanding that I had a little while back.
Have you any response for them?
Yeah, I'll just respond to both of those points. I'm happy to take away the proposal for a review report. I would concur with the suggestion for 12 months if members will be willing to agree to no less than 12 months, simply because although we hope the change will be seamless, it is effectively setting up a new service. So if we review it too quickly, you may get a distorted view from the early days. But after 12 months, we would have a whole year's worth of activity to report on. I would just like to make a caveat that we're bringing the whole of environmental health and creating across, as well as licensing, and creating a new antisocial behaviour service. So the benefits are planned to be seen across the piece rather than specifically in the licensing service. If you'll forgive me just for making the comment that I don't see any fault with what the Public Protection Partnership has provided in terms of the licensing service, and in the short time that I've been with the council, my personal opinion, the service has been very good. So I'm sort of slightly balk at the idea that we're going to do better than what was done before, specifically in licensing, but across the piece, certainly we will be providing something new and slightly different. The second point was the role of the committee. It's not, of course, completely my place to say whether the role of the committee should change, but I venture to suggest that the scrutiny committee, the community scrutiny committee, might be the appropriate committee to look at enforcement and safety, which is environmental health, licensing and antisocial behaviour across the piece, and scrutinise any element of service delivery that it wishes. Because the licensing and appeals committee is a statutory committee which has a statutory remit. So I'd leave that for members to discuss further and decide, but that would be my recommendation.
Could we be informed of any snags that happened before the year in the process? Because if it's something major is happening and there's a problem, we'd like to know about it before a full year.
Yes, so I could take that on an exception basis. Yes, if there was a risk issue due to lack of staff or lack of IT, lack of performance, whatever the issue might be, then certainly the committee would be entitled to know. So I'll take that away.
Chris and then Bill.
Yep. The repatriation of PPP. PPP consists of trading standards, environmental health and licensing. This is the licensing committee. Licensing under PPP was under this committee. I can't see anything that's changing in the functions of licensing. All that's happened, or all that will happen, is that we'll have probably locally based officers doing exactly what was being done before. So why we should suddenly need KPIs, I don't understand. We've heard a lot of talk about ASB this evening, which is absolutely fine, but ASB is environmental health. It's not licensing, unless you want to say, well, because of ASB, you might want to review a premises license. So they are three separate things. But Lindsay mentioned the remit of this committee. I believe there are some councils which do extend the licensing committee to cover some other things, maybe, for example, trading standards. That would be a political decision, but it's an interesting one. I don't, as a licensing committee, it's probably not right place to talk about trading standards. I don't really understand how we deal with trading standards now, because we've sort of retained the service that PPP provided, although it's not in the PPP. And I don't quite see how that works. But generally, my question would be, could we extend the licensing committee to also deal with things like ASB or maybe trading standards? I know a licensing committee, you do need to have a licensing committee to deal with premises license. That's a statutory requirement. But is it within our powers to extend it if we thought that was a politically sensible thing to do?
Can I just relate to that? I was on the licensing committee before the PPP actually was created, and we did have all those responsibilities at that time. Trading standards and all of the environmental health and so forth was reported back to the committee at that time. It was only when PPP was created that they disappeared as far as that aspect of it was concerned. So I don't know whether we would require special arrangements to deal with that, but it certainly has happened in the past. Can I take Bill now, please?
Yeah, actually, Chris has said more or less what I was going to say, but the only thing is, am I right in thinking that to serve on this committee, everybody has to have been trained? So would that limit the people who would be able to discuss environmental health and environmental issues, because we would need a vast number of people needing to be trained unnecessarily if we were to bring it all together?
I could check with we got somebody from the legal side now that may be able to. As far as I was aware, it was the licensing has a specific aspect related to it because of the legal aspects behind that, but the trading standards and others areas don't fall into the same category as that. But
Through you, Chair. Yes, good evening. I'm the legal advisor here tonight. My understanding is that obviously the licensing function is a statutory function in relation to which the authority has to have a committee. In relation to trading standards, environmental health, antisocial behaviour, my understanding is there's no statutory function for a separate committee in relation to those. But turning to the question of training, yes, indeed, training is required for the licensing committee members purely because you were called upon to make decisions on the subcommittee in relation to individuals' livelihoods effectively and quite serious matters. So that is part of the rationale for that training. And I fully understand that the suggestion is that without having that training, there could be an issue arising whereby other members weren't at liberty to raise issues which didn't require that training because they're not on the licensing committee. Legally speaking, that's probably the limit of where I can go tonight. It's something that may well need to be considered because clearly, as per the member question earlier, antisocial behaviour, for example, and licensing very much go hand in hand. They are interlinked, but they're all also separate areas. But no statutory function. I can't really add much else in relation to the legal position, unless I can clarify anything for you, Chair.
okay, thank you. No, that sounds helpful.
Could we please have the training, even if it's not required, it would be useful to have it for antisocial behavior for things like everything else that we're going to be doing, parts of the PPP that we haven't been trained upon. I mean, it's only going to be a day or two, a couple of evenings of training. It's not going to be a month or something like that.
Yeah. Shahid?
Can I assist further, Chair, in relation to that? I'm not sure that as to what specific training in relation to antisocial behaviour members would be requesting, because it's not something that would fall in terms of decision making, unlike the Licensing Act 2003 applications or applications in respect of Hackney carriages. Appeals don't fall and applications don't fall within the remit of antisocial behaviour. It may well be that members would appreciate some further training on the powers available to the local authority, but they are normally powers delegated to and exercised at officer level, as opposed to by virtue of a subcommittee hearing.
If I could just venture one more comment, Chair, with your permission, just to reiterate, sort of advancing the role of the Communities Scrutiny Committee, not least because as well as interlinks between antisocial behaviour and licensing, you've got interlinks with community safety and domestic violence and environmental pollution and various other issues, more environmental issues rather than behavioural or licensing issues. So I just recommend that the committee takes that into consideration as to where actually the best place is to set a forward plan which might want to scrutinise some of these other functions.
Thank you. Yes, of course, there may well be different range of people actually at the time after the election coming up with regards to that. Can I take Shahid and then Sarah?
Actually, the point which I was going to make was the officer has made. I think before we take on, this go into much more deeper, one thing I'm not sure whether we have the, I suppose, the authority to take on more than what the legislation says that the committee can take. Secondly, we need to be mindful of the fact, which the officer has highlighted, that we don't actually, we don't duplicate the work. So, we don't want to do the work here, which is already being done by another scrutiny committee as well. I don't think that is a good use of our time. So if the scrutiny committee is monitoring that particular work and there's a lot of interlinkages which you mentioned, then I'd rather leave it there rather than bringing it as part of this committee. And that's what I would favor.
Thanks. I was just going to make the point that we're going around in circles discussing something when we don't actually have all the facts in front of us. And I wonder if maybe a way forward is to ask that maybe we get a report in the next meeting with the various options, leave it as is, some alternatives that we could look at, that we could actually then debate properly with those facts in front of us, and then make a recommendation based on that. And I appreciate it won't be within our remit to make that decision, but we could certainly make a recommendation based on that report, because we don't have everything in front of us right now, and we're just going around in circles.
Chair, can I just come back? I think we just need to be careful, because obviously every report which the officers are going to do, they will take time for them as well, and time equals money, end of the day, right? So I think it's only worth asking the officers to do something if actually it's going to be add value. The point which I made is we don't want to duplicate the work. If it's being done in the scrutiny committee, leave it there. If they're not going to do, or maybe let us do it and take away the work from the scrutiny committee. I'm not sure we can decide on that, but it shouldn't be one or the other. It shouldn't be both of them, sorry. And then that's the point. And if we're going to ask the officers to get a report, obviously, but do we have the authority to make a decision on that?
Michael.
Thank you, Chairman. And it's come a little way actually, but just following on from what Rochelle was saying about training, which I think is absolutely incredibly important, that we know we know what we should be doing and what we can't do and what we can do. There was a comment about or from officers that some of this authority is delegated to officers. I think it would be incredibly useful if we as members also knew a bit more about that as well. I mean, we might have no decision making on that area, but I think it'd be useful background to know what officers can do and what they can't do, and what we can and what we can't do. And I think that's the way forward on that point. But I know that following the election in May, there will be new members anyhow, so they'll have to go through all the training that we've gone through, and obviously we'll have refreshers as well, I would think. So I think if that could be in the mix, that would be really, really useful. Thank you.
Chris.
So just picking up Shahid's point, scrutiny in this committee are completely different. Scrutiny is a reviewing committee. This is an executive committee. This actually makes decisions. The requests for a report from officers, I've no idea what is being asked for here. I really don't. If you're talking about extending the committee, that's a fundamental political decision. I think it's pretty futile us going down that path. That needs to be dealt with in other forums.
Right, Michelle.
From what I understand, corporate and community has had a lot of extraordinary meetings because their work is getting worse and worse and worse. And if we put this on them as well, what's going to happen to them?
Sorry. The reason I raised the points I did is I had a bit of uncertainty as to how the various parts of that's come in from PPP and elsewhere, which are now put into the new overall group, is actually going to be dealt with us as councillors. I mentioned that I'd had a conversation with leader of the council a little while ago, and we both did think that there must be a way of having either a single committee or others to look at it. On ASB, that links in very closely with the Community Safety Partnership, which both Barry and I have had heavy involvement. And that is a very sensible link for the parties to go together. But there's also a function that we need to look at within the council as to what we want from ASB and what we do and where things come in and what policies we may want to put it within the ASB. And at the moment, taking it to an overview and scrutiny committee is, as was described, is not the right committee. So I think what we're looking at is what is the final way, and it is outside of this committee, but I think we do need to start thinking about it, is how is this aspect of the new group being linked in, where we now have all the various parts now coming under under one area. And I think there needs to be, I would personally suggest that there was a coordinating committee, which includes the licensing committee, because we can have part A of a meeting being the licensing functions, part B being something else, and part B being another part. As Barry mentioned, it may have been that's how it was done. Otherwise, we end up having one part of the area looked at in this area, one bit part looked in the other, and that is all linked in with the disconnect that we had with where we had with the other service. And that was the discussion that we were looking at when we were trying to come up with how we would improve the overall service, not just the licensing part, the overall aspect of where we move forward. And I do agree there's some discussions need to be had outside, but I'm raising it at the moment because at the moment I'm confused. I know where ASB is coming with community safety partnership, but the other parts, I don't know where they come, and I still don't. And I've been on the council 12 years. Maybe say that's my fault, but it's just a nebulous area to grab hold of, and I think it does need to come under a common umbrella, and I think we need to raise that. And those that are in the position of making those decisions before the elections or after, to think about it. And I think that's all we can do tonight.
Yes, as far as that side of it's concerned, this is something that we've not done in the past or seen how it's all going to work, and to try and speculate at this time of the evening and the state of the circumstances, this isn't appropriate really to discuss that now, because I'm sure that the officers will be wanting to present all of the information to councillors as soon as they can with regards to the structures and so forth, and the executive and so forth will take note of those issues from that point of view. Has anybody else got any further questions? If not, we have no further items on the agenda, and I would like to close the meeting, please. Thank you for attending.